Oh, we're recording.
Now we're live, yeah.
I mean, I never said that I could do it better than you.
Dude, oh my gosh. You said you would show me how to do a good intro.
Yeah, it was a joke, Keegan. You ever heard of that?
I haven't.
I do that sometimes.
Okay.
Hi, and welcome
I'm
to this
personally
podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Keala Gore. Today we have joining us Keegan Drummond, a man who needs no introduction. Yeah.
Okay, so I
Yeah.
mean, I guess to explain, since you did such a great job introing the podcast.
Whoa! I wasn't done.
Oh, you weren't, so I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's where Jesse comes in. We're tag teaming.
I'm Jesse, and I'm scared because when the three of us gather, I feel like conversations are hard to tame, and so we will do our best to keep things coherent. But that's Keegan's job, and he's the one talking.
No, it's our job.
Keegan.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Keegan's
you're
our guest.
hosting.
Yeah, I know. It's our job, but it shouldn't be our job. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, who trusted us with this? Whose idea was
Keegan
this?
should just interview himself, and it's already happening. So.
I think we've been planning this for like 2 weeks now. You know, feel like the plan's kind of gone out the window. Anyway, it's hard. It's hard to just give this thing up to you guys.
Yeah. You're welcome. Anyway, welcome to the podcast, Keegan. Welcome to your podcast. It's good to have you on. How you feeling today?
It's good to have you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. What did you have for breakfast?
I feel like. What did Keegan have for breakfast, or what did I have for breakfast?
Never mind.
We should just restart.
We should honestly restart. That was pretty good, though.
We're staying.
Absolutely
I don't edit this thing. I won't do it.
Well, I've listened to every podcast. Have you listened to all of them, Kellen?
Yes.
And I feel like everyone's been wanting to hear Keegan's story, but he's just been in host mode, and so we hit him with the Uno reverse card, and so it's just gonna be all about Keegan today.
Heck yeah!
And so I guess we could just jump right in. Keegan, I know you like bring up your like Lutheran upbringing a lot before like the youth days. I guess we can just like start chronologically.
I guess.
And maybe just like, maybe just to kind of frame the journey well. What do you remember? What do you recall kind of like growing up, being dropped into kind of like that Lutheran background?
Yeah, I recall everything. I mean, it's as you guys know, I recall everything. And I mean, that's no different. So I grew up in a very conservative sect of Lutheranism. I think when people think of Lutheranism, they might think of more of progressive sort of synods, what they're called in Lutheranism, especially here in America. But I grew up in a very conservative, one might say like Orthodox Lutheranism that was very sort of isolationist. They didn't believe in, for example, they didn't believe in praying with other Christian denominations. So my dad was on the church softball team and they played against a Baptist church, and the Baptist church pastor asked our pastor if they wanted to pray before the game, and our pastor said no. We also were fiercely anti-Catholic. So I mean, I grew up believing that Catholics were going to hell, and that the papacy in itself, the chair of St. Peter, was representative of the Antichrist. So very conservative politically, theologically, and I grew up in that. I was born into that. I was baptized 1 month old into that tradition, and then went to a private school in that tradition. I was surrounded by the same like 10 or so kids growing up from preschool to when I left, which would have been 5th grade, I think. And then I'm going to like church every weekend with these folks too. So that's sort of my world. I didn't know anything outside of it until I moved to Hawaii at the age of 11, and then stayed in that while I was in Hawaii. Very small community in Hawaii. We ended up leaving over some differences that we had with the pastoral staff there, and then ended up at a very large evangelical church where I met you guys.
That's an interesting transition, going from a very conservative Lutheran church to like a comparatively not conservative or liberal, like.
Yeah, like I mean, it's not liberal. I wouldn't say. I mean,
No, maybe
theologically,
comparatively.
just maybe not a very robust theological tradition, and specifically this evangelical tradition. I think the main two draws were that my brother was getting into paddling at the time, and the church had a paddling ministry, and our neighbor was part of that paddling ministry and invited us. And I think that might have been the foray. My dad thinks that the church also had a jiu-jitsu ministry, and we went to that a couple of times because we were doing jiu-jitsu beforehand. And, it also was, the biggest church on the island. So kind of wanted to see what happened. I think we started off with the midweek services because those were supposed to be the more deeper, more intimate, less mega churchy and more you might see more spiritually profound things being said, not necessarily seeker sensitive type of preaching. So that's kind of where we started.
I mean, that's kind of where like you and Keala both like, and me kind of like jump in, or like our stories kind of collide.
Yeah.
Is like at youth ministry. What did that kind of feel like going from that like Lutheran tradition to that evangelical world? Like, did you kind of feel that tension at a young age, or like what was going on?
I did. I will say real quick, Cal and I actually didn't meet at youth ministry. Our parents went to one Bible study together. So I went to his house when I was really young, probably 12, maybe even younger. Yeah, probably 12 years old. And our parents were in this super long Bible study, only one time that my parents attended. And I think we were there 3 hours, and he didn't have a TV, which kind of blew my mind. So we were
Wow.
just in no video game consoles. So
Just getting roasted.
We just had to talk.
basically,
What a
no, it
concept.
was interesting. I mean, we were, because it was my brother who would have been 16 at the time, your cousin who was maybe a little younger than my brother, and then us two, who are 9 days apart. And I think we talked, and I would ask you like, oh, do you watch Sweet Life of Zach and Cody? And you're like, I don't even know what that is, man.
What?
Like,
That's not true.
I've never heard of Disney Channel or whatever. I don't know. They're just like.
And this is you. Here's the thing. So the Telecaster is the most diverse.
Like,
yeah, we talked about Telecasters. That was something I was gonna.
Yeah, I don't. And then I think. Yeah, that would have been, but then I don't think you and I hung out until
Probably
much later.
Yeah, a couple
like
years later.
Because you weren't really in the youth ministry too much until much later as well. And then yeah.
My first memory is at youth camp and Keegan sitting next to me, and he says, "Wow, bro, you smell." And
that's your first memory.
That is my first actual memory. I don't know if I'm exaggerating that, but that's what
That's probably the first time I spoke with you. Yeah, because I mean, we were playing. I mean, we'd like play dodgeball together, and obviously grown up around each other in youth ministry. But then, yeah, I mean, you stunk really bad.
No, I really did, and that's the sad part, is that it was true. Is that when we were? Was that like a 3-day camp where we were at the lead?
Yeah.
And like we had to shower at the beach. Was that the same camp?
Yeah. So that would have been going
crazy.
into high school, and so I think because you were hanging out with a bit of a younger crowd in the junior high ministry, like the 7th graders while we were 8th grade, and then you came to the high school camp ministry with, and I think that was the thing. Like, it was when you were going rising freshman in high school, you either could go to the junior high camp or you could go to the high school camp.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
a buddy and I were like the only ones who went to the high school camp. And I think you didn't know anyone at the high school camp, probably other than
100%.
me and that guy.
One.
And we didn't really.
Yeah, I knew you
we didn't
after
really
you
talk to you.
ruined my life. Yeah.
Yeah, so that would have been that would have been it. And yeah, and then your shorts in particular were so
Oh
like
yeah.
I could just I
It's
like I don't know. I mean, I don't
It's
know
like
why,
the
but
camp was 3
the
days.
scent was coming from your shorts, and I was like, oh my
I
God,
remember the aroma
stink.
very clearly. It was like a 3-day camp, but you needed like 12 days worth of like clothes. So it's like, I don't know. Maybe that's my bad. I don't know.
Crazy. You should have known.
Whatever. Well, should have known.
That's a funny first memory. It I feel like kind of sets up your trajectory almost. Like you were
Being a
very
really stink person.
kind of no you Keegan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not Jesse. Jesse smells a lot better.
Yeah,
I
I smell better. Hopefully.
he's got married and lots changed since then.
Glow up.
But like I feel like you were never afraid to say what you thought about things. And it's funny you mentioned it on Ayaka's podcast. I don't know if we're moving too fast, and Jesse can back up.
It doesn't
if you
really
want to,
matter, right? I don't know.
No, that's good.
You mentioned on Ayaka's podcast calling out one of your friends for holding a girl's hand in a picture.
Okay, yeah.
And it's funny. So I was that friend. There's a picture that was posted. It was kind of a joke. This girl that we weren't anything. It was a joke. And maybe there was something there like later, but at the time it was just funny. But Keegan did not think it was funny, and Keegan messaged me on Facebook. And actually, your exact words, I like that you censored it because I can't repeat it.
Yeah, don't repeat that, please.
But basically, it was, bro, you're being a blank Christian. Like blank is the censored word.
Yeah, not my proudest moment. I was also 14 probably, so.
Yeah. See, I honestly at that point, we were going to small group for a couple months, maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe.
I feel like we must have been pretty close because I don't know. I feel that I probably wouldn't have said something as strong to someone I didn't know as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
not to put any blast. I think yeah.
What's that?
I said, well, you didn't know me.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
No, I feel I was actually.
What's your name? Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What's your name? Doesn't matter.
Yeah. I had a I was very, and I still am. I'm a very scrupulous person, and I have these very high expectations of how things ought to be and how pure and right things need to be. And I think for me, I was very frustrated because I felt that as a 14-year-old, I really couldn't justify being in a relationship with a girl. And that was something that was, I don't know, it's beyond me, but I wanted to be. And I liked talking to girls and hitting on girls. And I was still doing that, which was weird. And, stringing girls along, texting them for months on end with nothing ever happening. But I didn't really, I don't know, I was just very judgmental about things. My mom actually told me about something recently. I don't know if she's misremembering this, but I feel like I would remember this. But she recalled one time, and it would have been around this time when I was like 14 or 15, where the ministry team asked the student leaders to fast and pray for some conference we were going to attend or a camp or something that we were preparing to lead at. And she was talking to me about this recently, that I was very frustrated at how all the other student ministry leaders weren't really taking the fasting and the praying seriously. And I got so upset, and spiraling during that time that I went out into the backyard and started throwing up just because I was so frustrated and angry. I don't really remember that, but I wouldn't put it past me to kind of have a sort of moment like that where I was just really intensely um, judgmental and sort of rigid about standards.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. You've always been like a person of deep conviction, which like as we follow your story, you've kind of ended up on like both sides of the spectrum, both theologically, philosophically, ministry wise. I guess like going through high school, like with that conviction, how did that lead you to be like, okay, like I'm gonna go to Bible college, like right after high school? What was that kind of like?
Yeah, I wasn't really intent on that. I actually that was not in the cards at all. Actually, I have to correct myself there. When I was 14, I went to high school. First day, we had what's called CAPS. It was Career Academic Planning. And first day, you get settled in homeroom. You guys wouldn't know this because your homeroom was your actual home, but there's this thing called homeroom, and that's sort of your base for all 4 years of high school. And um, your homeroom
Ouch.
at the school I went to had this career class where you talked about what you wanted to do in college and career. So first day, it's what do you want to do when you're growing up, when you grow up? And I said I wanted to be a theologian. My homeroom teacher happened to be Christian, so she was kind of taken aback by that. But yeah, I was sort of intent on that. And then throughout high school, I kind of had this like falling away. I don't know how to necessarily term it. Um, and then obviously started dating my girlfriend at 16, who I then got married to. And yeah, during high school, I wasn't really intent on going to Bible college. I wasn't really super. I was still very judgmental, but I wasn't necessarily serious about my faith. I was like skipping out of youth service and you know just getting into trouble, not doing my homework, whatever. Yeah, it wasn't until the summer after high school that I decided to go to Bible college and pursue a career in pastoral ministry.
So I don't know how much you want to talk about that or get into details on that, but I'm curious. I'm always curious on all these podcasts, kind of like how people would describe like maybe what they would have called a calling then, like a calling from God, like God is telling me to do this. So I was curious, like how you would characterize that for yourself.
Yeah, I don't. Looking back, I would when I was in my early 20s, I would have called it a calling. Now I think it's sort of just the summary of various syllogisms that led me to make the decisions in my life that led me to a certain trajectory in career and academics, whatever. Um, so yeah, I mean, I basically my then girlfriend and I were going to go to DC for a summer to hang out with her mom, and I'd just be there for 3 months before going to community college, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought I was actually going to do like athletic physical therapy. I think that was the plan. Um, but I bring a book with me from David Platt's Radical, and I remember reading it and feeling quite compelled by this discussion around how we interpret scripture. And it's so funny, like these narratives in my life are really easy for me to remember, but sort of uh like theological philosophical points are really hard for me to remember and then reiterate. But um he sort of says that we're very serious about interpreting certain things very literally, but then when it's things that we're uncomfortable with, we don't have the same type of interpretive scrutiny. So, for example, I think the example he provides is, you know, you know, I came to divide, this narrative of like mother and daughter-in-law being sort of separated because of the coming of the kingdom of God in the person of Jesus, and like, well, why would you interpret that figuratively? Like, didn't Christ come to bring a sword? And I remember reading that and being like, maybe I haven't lived this really radical Christian life, and I know that the right thing to do is to be Christian, and the highest calling a Christian can have is to be a pastor. So maybe I ought to like live radically for Christ and just go all in on Jesus. And that was sort of the initial calling, I guess. And it like I said, it's more of like these sorts of um, syllogisms rather than a call narrative per se. If that makes sense. But in my early 20s, I would have said like, "Oh, the Lord, I read this book and I got called right then and there." It was, I'm just I'm a very linear thinker, I guess, in that sort of way.
Yeah. I had another question just that came up when you were talking about that. So it's interesting because like all these people that are on the podcast, like typically the peak, or maybe not typically, a lot of them, the peak experience of Christianity or evangelicalism is like in high school. But it seems like for you, that was like the lowest point of like your like involvement.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had this sort of conversion moment, I think in 8th grade, and where I read John 1 at a church service. I wasn't paying attention to the sermon, and the pastor, he opened up with John 1, and I had never read that in my life. And I remember feeling just quite shocked. I thought this was just otherworldly, this discourse around light and the word. And I felt compelled to sort of enter into that light, and where there was life and no darkness, or the darkness couldn't comprehend it. So I have this sort of conversion moment, my early teens, and then I don't know, I just got disillusioned with things and caught up in being a high schooler or whatever, chasing girls and attention, whatever. And I think 18, I sort of picked that back up, this radical decision to pursue Bible college and pastoral ministry, and that was from then on it was just there, I guess.
I think that's, I guess, pretty accurate, because going into Bible college, that's like where my image of you is like mostly formed. That's where like we had the most kind of like interactions, and that kind of deep conviction follows you into Bible college from that 18 to 22, 23. And you kind of build this reputation of someone who is linear, a critical thinker. So you kind of had this like a image of just like never being in service, but always being in the coffee shop.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's at least what I remember. And people would always go up to you like, "Hey, Keegan, like, what do you think about this? Is this right? Run this through you," which is, I guess, looking back, is a pretty honorable like compliment.
I mean, it's so funny because as an evangelical, I'm going to Bible college, and I just thought I was smarter than everyone. And I thought that even, when you had asked earlier how the transition from Lutheranism to evangelicalism, I thought I was smarter than everyone when I was 12 years old going to the evangelical church. I was like, oh, I've been going to Christian private schools my whole life, and I've been memorizing scripture, and I knew Lutheran theology really well. When my brother got confirmed, they ask you a series of theological questions in front of the entire church, and you have to answer them before you get confirmed to sort of affirm the Lutheran theology. And my mom always tells the story about how I used to whisper the answers to her before someone could share the answer in front of the church, because it was just something that was I was really prideful about knowing, I guess. So, and then I get to the evangelical church and I'm like, oh, these guys read the Bible every day. I don't know anything. And then I get to Bible college and then I'm like, oh, I know more than these people. And I didn't really know more than these people. I was just maybe reading avant-garde theology and whatever, but just typical Theo, bro. Yeah, I mean, it's just this series of being extremely overconfident in what I know and then finding out I really didn't know much. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, we had, obviously our church had a coffee shop, which my wife ran during the weekend services, and I notoriously, did not attend the services because I didn't feel like I would get anything out of a 45-minute sermon preached by someone who I felt at the time knew less than me. So, maybe I'll just like read a book or something or work on my homework or yeah. But that was.
I remember you found out one of the youth ministries was leading one of the worship sets with New Wine by Hillsong. And I remember you had just such a hill to die on with that song. Just like doctrinally, just wasn't compatible. Didn't make sense. I don't know why that memory was like so clear to me.
I don't even remember what my argument was. I just thought the song was dumb. I still think a lot of the songs are dumb. Even when I worked in Catholic campus ministry, I thought a lot of the songs we did were dumb, and they were a lot of, the typical contemporary worship hits in the evangelical space that the kids happen to listen to on Spotify or whatever. I hated all of it though. But I don't know. I think that's just more of a personality thing than a theology thing. I probably did have something to say about New Wine. I can't remember though.
I know you brought up David Platt, who is a well-known Reformed author. Were you Reformed throughout Bible college, just a portion of it, or like what was that kind of journey?
Yeah, I think, coming from the Lutheran world, I had some of those Reformation tendencies. And then I think with the Young Restless Reformed movement championed by, folks like Driscoll and Platt and Matt Chandler and others, I sort of got caught up in that when I was younger, and those messages resonated with me at a fairly young age, at like 13 or 14, as this sort of disillusioned teenager. And so I guess when I first started Bible college, I was kind of getting serious about my faith again. So it was sort of picking up from where I left off when I was 13 and 14. So, Driscoll, Piper, all of them. And then I quickly realized that I didn't really like it anymore, and it didn't really make sense anymore. Specifically, the idea around predestination, limited atonement, those types of things. And it was just like, well, that doesn't really make sense. And I didn't really even want to believe it. So it's just like, okay, I'm going to just abandon that. And then I probably went like overboard into the open theism sort of, Clark Pinnock, Greg Boyd type of camp. And then kind of just chilled out on that. So I went through a number of different theological camps, I think. And even when I went to divinity school in the mainland, I was trying to find a home. I tried out Methodism, I really thought I was going to be Mennonite, and then ended up just becoming Catholic. So, but
Sorry, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit because I
okay.
realized I I don't know. I don't feel like I understand like so it like when you like your disillusionment started like at the beginning of high school. Do you was
With
there
what?
any? No, I was wondering like do you know what like spurred that? Like where did that come from? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it just goes back to that sort of ridiculous kind of expectation of how things ought to be. And I think the reformed movement of the late 2000s provided a very strong framework of thinking and theology that I could attach myself to, while sort of the charismatic evangelical church that we were a part of and that sort of movement that's happening kind of parallel with the young restless reformed type of thing didn't really provide that structure. So I think um I just appreciate dogma a little more, I think. So uh, um and I felt like there was something being clearly articulated that I could um devote myself to a
Mm.
bit more. Light machines, smoke machines, and all of that. I jumping and clapping, it just didn't make sense to me. Like I felt like you needed this real, authentic relationship with Christ, and you had to feel really sorry for yourself and take sin very seriously. And you do, but I mean, I don't know. You don't have to be a little twerp about it.
Hmm. I mean, so it seems like you were always like in that kind of evangelical like period. You were in it, but you were never really like a part of it. You never really subscribed to it. You always kind of had that tension from the beginning, like something feels off or insincere, or disingenuine. Would you kind of
Yeah, I
say?
always felt like I was a bit of a black sheep. I always felt that I had kind of piecemealed my theology in some way. Um, like I liked a Lutheran Eucharistic theology, but I liked a sort of like Calvinist view of Scripture while holding like a charismatic view of pneumatology or something like that. Like I was I just kind of like, but I felt like I couldn't really fit into a particular type of Protestantism too well, and
Mm,
all of it resonated with me to some extent, but I couldn't necessarily align myself with it completely.
mm,
So do you think like I guess today, do you think that that's important to have like this unified theology? Like is there a problem in your mind to like unite different traditions or like
Well, I'm Roman Catholic now, so I mean, like, there is a theological tradition, um, and an
yeah.
authoritative teaching. Um,
I guess what I mean is like
yeah,
I know you're Catholic. You have to like remind us every like 5 minutes.
yeah.
Um just kidding. But I guess just like in concept, like is there a problem for you like that you had to like bring in all these different types of ideas?
I mean, I guess in a way, I was sort of practicing becoming Catholic because I think in some way, what am I camera? In Catholicism, it kind of I don't I want to be precise with it, but basically it respects and maybe even like not accepts but admires and practices the different traditions of um other traditions. For example, I guess to be more concrete, like for example, charismatic Christianity, which emerges in the early 20th century with the Azusa Street revival. The Catholic Church recognizes this sort of charismatic movement happening, and then tries to adapt it to Catholicism in the 60s. And they have all these meetings with cardinals to talk about it. Like, how does this work? How does this sort of jive with the the magisterium, the teaching office of the church? Like, how do we do that? And they did that. And it was, they had to deal with the things of like the language around the baptism of the Holy Spirit or whatever. So it's remaining sort of like open to these traditions without necessarily co-opting the entire belief system, if that makes sense. Like, we'll be someone like speaking in tongues or whatever, but not necessarily like there's this subsequent baptism of the Holy Spirit that has to occur in order for you to receive the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Like, no, that doesn't really jive with theology.
Mm. And so you kind of have like that fragmented, like piecemeal theology you were talking about going through Bible college, but at the same time, like with the fragmented kind of thinking, you're still like moving forward in your like ministry journey. I know you started like heavily getting involved with the young adults ministry, maybe more on like the youth ministry side. What was kind of going on like with you there,
Yeah,
getting
I
more
mean, when I
involved?
got married, my wife and I, we felt that we needed to get plugged back in and to sort of plant ourselves in church and in doing ministry, because that's sort of all we knew, and that's where we knew we were going to grow. So we wanted to do something together. So I think young adult ministry sort of made sense at that point, because we got married at the age of 18, and then we're transitioning out of high school. So young adult ministry made sense. And I think it was just our attempt to stay planted and to stay plugged in, because we both had this tendency to sort of draw away. Um, and we knew that wasn't necessarily good for us.
Mm. I mean, and this is already pretty fascinating because most of the time, like that religious momentum and like energy kind of fades, like kind of what Kel was mentioning. Like after high school, people graduate, they go to college, um, think through different worldviews. You not only go to Bible college, you further your theological education, but you take one more radical step and you decide, hey, I want to get my master's
Yeah.
uh, in theology. What is that like extra step? What's going on there?
My dream was always to become the teaching pastor at the church we grew up in. That was always my dream. I wanted to preach and I wanted to teach theology. And so I was going to the young adult ministry, but I wasn't going to church because I just didn't really feel like I needed to. Wasn't really getting anything out of it. So I ended up getting passed up for becoming the young adult pastor. And it was at that moment where I'm just like, I'm going to become someone um, that's sort of undeniable, that you would have to consider like making a part of our church. And yeah, I just felt so alone during that time. I remember even when we graduated, because I think you and I graduated the same year in 2019. I remember this pretty uh, vividly, that it was sort of the tradition that all the graduates would stand at the front of the church, and your pastor would come up and pray for you. And I remember that no one prayed for me. No one like stood there and laid their hand on me. And I was just like, um, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to just be undeniable and be someone that, um, but I wanted to serve, and I wanted to be someone who, um, just brought back that knowledge to our community. And yeah, that was that not getting the job and then kind of getting like put on the back burner was kind of the catalyst for me to like, all right, we're moving on. And yeah.
Would you say that was a pivotal moment in your I want to say this disdain? Maybe that's not the right word. Maybe like you're disconnecting from the evangelical church. Like I don't know if you I don't know. Just from listening to you say that, it sounds like it was a big deal. I don't really. When you were at Duke, you weren't attending. You were.
Yeah, I was attending a bunch of different churches. I mean, I literally attended every church in town, I think, and which was kind of wild. Wow. Like I went to like an emergent church, Methodist church, Baptist church, Evangelical church, Mennonite, Episcopal. I mean, I really wanted to see if anything resonated with me. I remember, at the time it was very there's a lot of, I mean, it's a very hyper political environment for sure. Being at Duke and sort of going to a divinity school that is predominantly like a mainline Protestant. That was the other thing. I didn't even know I was evangelical till I went to Duke. That was kind of weird. Like I remember I knew what the word evangelical was, but I didn't I remember telling a girl who was Methodist, like, oh yeah, I go to like this kind of church. It's sort of like a Hillsong. And she's like, oh, you're evangelical. And I'm like, yeah, aren't we all evangelical? Like I didn't realize that evangelicalism was its own sort of niche, if that makes sense. I thought like it's very strange. Yeah. So yeah, I just kind of exposed myself to all those different traditions.
Yeah, I guess looking back, I do forget that like you were a front runner candidate and probably the most qualified like to get that young adults like position. And I completely like forgot that. Do you, looking back, were you able to objectively separate like the personal digs against you and like the doctrine of the church, or did you find yourself kind of like seeing those two kind of like get meshed together to kind of like have this cynicism in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there were a lot of rumors about like what I believed that kind of put me on the outs, particularly around hell. I think there was a rumor that I didn't believe in hell and that I was a universalist and all that kind of stuff. But it's like no one asked me, so I don't know. I did question a lot of different things. I remember the person who ended up leaving the young adult ministry, who I thought I'd be taking over for. I remember they preached on penal substitutionary atonement, and I challenged that pretty strongly. I was that was something I really had a big hang up on, and yeah, I don't know. It was kind of both and. I think there was this disconnect between me and sort of the powers that be. I always sort of felt that I was on the out, but that also encompassed my constantly challenging the practices and theology that came up, whether it was in Bible college, in the chapels, or in classrooms, or at church in sermons and certain beliefs and practices that took place in the liturgical context.
And you kind of you're at Duke, which is kind of funny. You go from a very conservative evangelical church to, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, one of like most well-known liberal universities.
Yeah.
Theologically speaking,
it has a reputation of sort of being in the middle. I would say the students lean pretty heavily liberal, and I think a lot of the professors are too, obviously. But I think it's has a tradition of being fairly moderate. But to me, coming into it, it might as well have been the Democratic National Convention or something. You know, it was extremely liberal to me, coming into it. So yeah, I mean that was something, but that was intentional. I felt that I felt like the professors at Duke were able to sort of wed um, social justice and theology in a way that was coherent to me at the time. Folks like, you know, Douglas Campbell, Stanley Hauerwas, you know, I felt like it had this tradition of doing that work. So it made sense to me at the time.
And is this like the image of the hero's journey kind of like arising? Well, where like your, you know, study at Duke, did you feel like that was going to give you the credentials needed to like, this was going to make me like undeniably
I thought I would go
one of the most
do a
qualified.
PhD too, but I was like, yeah, I remember speaking to a mentor at the Bible college who was not affiliated with our church, and I remember him telling me, like, go to the school with the best name, like just like go to the best school you possibly can, go abroad if you have to, like figure it out. And I'm like, bet, like I'll do it. Okay. Yeah, that was the intention as well. You know, and yeah, I definitely could have gone the evangelical seminary route, but chose not to.
Where did that intention kind of change in the story?
As far as like returning to Hawaii,
or like going to Duke, I'm gonna be somebody, going to the best school. Does that intention change?
Yeah,
along the
I
way?
mean, we always intended on coming back to Hawaii, and you know, looking back on it now, it's because it's all we knew. It was, how do we get back home, and maybe we'll have that sort of Odysseus moment of going back home. But you know, that was sort of it, and it pretty much, that sort of fracture happened when I became Catholic, and I realized that, okay, everything's got to change now. Everything's going to change now, and the dreams and the trajectory that I had laid out for my own life is going to change. You're not gonna, you know, become a teaching pastor. You're not gonna plant a church. Like, you're gonna be a Catholic lay person for the rest of your life.
Which is funny because kid Keegan thought adult Keegan was gonna be going to hell as a Catholic, which is the ironic part. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't know. And it's so funny because I was developing these sort of Catholic sensibilities in Bible college, in undergrad. I was reading, you know, biographies on St. Francis of Assisi. I was reading Catholic mystical writings, like St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila. I was reading those even in Bible college, but it was just kind of like the theological aesthetics that resonated with me at the time, and the sort of mysticism around it that was my interest, and that was sort of limited to that. And I didn't really see myself becoming Catholic, although I did attend an Easter Mass during that time, just because I felt like whatever Easter service we were going to have at our church was not going to resonate with me at all. So I figured I should just go to something that just shocks me, and I ended up going to this Easter Mass in downtown Honolulu.
Pretty
Yeah,
shocked.
I think so. I mean, I had no idea what was happening. So that was, yeah, I guess so. And I still remember the homily, which is kind of shocking too to me now. I remember it had to do sort of recalling Ash Wednesday, recalling the message of death and mortality, and then being confronted by the resurrection. Like, it was, I still remember that. And I, you know, Yeah. Maybe there's some reason for that. I don't know.
Nice. Are we caught up to present day then?
I don't know. Maybe. Not really.
No? What are we missing? So you have this experience that
of coming into the Catholic
and
Church.
then yeah. I guess we didn't talk
Yeah.
about that, huh?
And that was motivated by a lot of things, and that was mostly sort of like this philosophical and theological sort of conviction that again kind of compelled me to Catholicism. I mean, and there was a lot of spiritual stuff happening behind the scenes as well. You know, I always say that the whole is greater than the sum of its individual parts, and that's especially the case for this for that conversion experience.
Looking back on everything, is there one individual thing you can think of in the evangelical church that they do well in, or like their greatest gift to?
You know, I mean, I think the strong reverence for the scripture, I think it's misplaced, but I think it's ultimately what led me to become Catholic. I had such a high view of the scriptures, and I felt that learning the scriptures was the most important work one could devote themselves to. And it was precisely the pursuit of that work that led me to becoming Catholic, because I realized that the hermeneutics of evangelicalism were just, it didn't really make sense. I mean, sola scriptura doesn't really make sense. It's pretty illogical and sort of historical. It's just, it doesn't work. So that's, yeah, I mean, that reverence for scripture is ultimately what led to me becoming Catholic. And I think it's equipped me to become a better Catholic. I mean, it's like you go into a mass and you don't realize, Catholics, cradle Catholics, they don't realize how scripturally dense the mass is, because they have no exposure to it whatsoever. You know, the scriptures, like there's this when during the liturgy of the Eucharist, when the Eucharist is consecrated, there's a response that the church says, where we all respond like, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the words and my soul shall be healed. Obviously, you guys know what that is. You know, that is the centurion, who asks for his servant to be healed. But I don't think the average Catholic would know that.
Whoa, is that a critique of the Catholic?
Yeah, I mean,
Church,
that's a pretty
what am
common
I?
critique, I think. I think Catholics, like
Yeah.
most sort of high church traditions, are pretty like scripturally illiterate. But that's just because they're not necessarily, there's not a strong tradition around reading the scriptures on your own, that kind of thing. There were some attempts to change that in Vatican II, but I think the fruit of that work still needs to be kind of sought out even now.
I mean, looking back, would you change anything about your journey, or would you like tell old Keegan anything different to change, or do you think it all kind of worked out the way it needed to?
I mean, I'm really thankful that I'm Catholic. Like, I really am. It brings me a lot of joy. That you know, and whatever leads me to that, whatever led me to that, ultimately, I'm very grateful for. I think that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah, I mean, I maybe there are some things I wish I did differently, I wish I was more humble, and I wish I was I prayed more, read scripture more, or whatever. But ultimately, like the sort of spirituality that it developed in the evangelical charismatic world, ironically, led me to Catholicism, which is kind of odd. And I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's a like? Do you have? Could you say concisely or like specifically like what Catholicism does for you that like evangelicalism didn't do?
Yeah. I think I was looking for answers in evangelicalism, and I felt like I wanted to be able to plant my feet on the ground, and I couldn't do that for the longest time. I might have told this story before on the podcast, but there was this time where the person who ended up taking the role of the young adult pastor in place of me, him and I were planning a sort of a doctrine course for new believers, and we all get together and we are like, what are we going to start with? And we're like, let's start with baptism. We spent literally 2 hours trying to discern what baptism meant and what it achieved. I'm, it's like it's something so fundamental, it's throughout the New Testament, to baptize, it's the Great Commission. But we couldn't articulate that. We couldn't articulate what it accomplished, if it did accomplish anything, or if it was purely symbolic. And I think that's like one of the main things is that um, I'm able to tap into this tradition of 2,000 years of history, and tap into something that's much bigger than me. I felt like I was having to try and figure out everything on my own, like what does baptism mean? Why do bad things happen to good people? It's like, well, we've been talking about this since the beginning, but I just didn't really know that because I, hadn't read Augustine or Aquinas or Anselm of Canterbury, whatever, like I just didn't do that. Or it's that like I tried to read them and I was just like, yeah, but their Eucharistic theology is weird. Or like, yeah, but like I had to sort of like take St. Thomas Aquinas, like kind of piecemeal his theology to contour it to my own beliefs. I'm like, what are we doing here?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, like that deep conviction from middle school, high school, followed you all the way through. And I guess like your search for coherency has led you to Catholicism and has been like the most fulfilling to you because it has made the most sense, just historically,
Yeah.
philosophically.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think, I mean, obviously the sacramental life of the church is quite compelling and transformational, I think that that's like huge, like going to confession for the first time or receiving the Eucharist for the first time. It's like those are transformational things. You're encountering a real grace, and you can point to this real thing happening, Christ really intersecting with your life in this very concrete way, where it's like I remember just I'm so scrupulous that I just dealt with guilt for so long, and there was just no real like finality to forgiveness. It was always just like I was constantly facing condemnation. I think that was really like psychologically pretty relieving perhaps. um yeah.
So do you have any issues with like say someone like Jesse or I like taking so like I guess I don't know. I don't know if I necessarily consider myself evangelical, but I attend, you know, an
Yeah.
evangelical church. Same one as Jesse. But would you have an issue with Jesse or I like kind of taking it like being influenced by like Catholic theology or Catholic ideas and not accepting the whole?
Yeah, I don't know. I always had a bit of an axe to grind with specifically Episcopals. I always noticed that with Episcopals at the divinity school that they would always sort of term themselves as like Anglo Catholics. And basically what I took that as was like I want all the aesthetics of Catholicism, I want all the grace of the sacraments, but I don't want to submit. I don't want to submit to authority. I'm too good for that. That's how I always at least interpreted that. And that's, you know, that's not very fair, but that's what I did. I don't know. I think it kind of starts there, you know. I think it starts there. That's how it started for me with the mystical tradition of the church. I strongly gravitated towards um the mystics. And then you know, for example, okay, so like this is how it all kind of started for me. I had a Catholic friend. I was interested in Catholicism at the divinity school, and I was kind of just going through this like mental health crisis. You know, it was mid COVID. I just felt like I was going insane. You know, the stress of grad school would not let up. Meanwhile, there's a global pandemic, whatever. And I felt like I was just having this mental crisis. And I sort of I was looking into saints who might have like had this same sort of like mental health problem that I was having. And I encountered this saint on the internet, Saint Therese of Lisieux, who is the same age as me at the time. She was 24 when she passed away from tuberculosis. She was a Carmelite nun in France. Um, and she wrote this autobiography called Story of a Soul. It's which ultimately led her to become a doctor of the church, someone who's professing theology for the church. Which, if you read the book, it's bizarre that you would say that this woman is like Irenaeus, Aquinas, Augustine, and then this girl who's writing about how she's a princess and daddy god theology type of writing. It's very strange. Um, but I felt like I had this sort of encounter with God through her intercession. And I felt this overwhelming reality that the saints were around me, surrounding me, and were in my corner praying for me. And I talked about that. I sort of debriefed that experience with a Catholic friend afterward. And they were like, you know, that's really cool. Um, what do you think? Like, basically, like, that's our saint. You know, it's a Catholic saint. Wouldn't you expect her to be leading you towards the truth, you know, the fullness of truth in the Catholic Church? And I was kind of like taken aback by that. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. Like her tradition, you know, she was a Carmelite nun. Um, So I think it was those sorts of experiences by that I kind of picked and chose at in Catholicism that ultimately led me to become Catholic. I realized that um, this just made sense, and then the parts that didn't make sense, I sort of had to submit to God and hoped that He would put the pieces together for me later. You know.
What
I
parts
think
did it make sense to you?
particularly the Marian dogmas around the Immaculate Conception, the Assumption of Mary. Those were quite problematic for me, and you know, um, even like the ever virginity of Mary, that was problematic for me. Um, then I sort of realized historically, theologically, it's the only thing that made sense.
Hmm. I guess that's one thing. This is like, I'm probably gonna sound. I am ignorant to like all the like Catholicism. But like one thing based on our conversations, something that I would have a hang up with, and maybe that's why I like evangelicalism or whatever my version of this is because there's this kind of freedom to there's core things we have to believe, and there are things that are not core that you can have. There's a big range, maybe a wider range of opinions on that you can have and still be a Christian. And it seems like in Catholicism, it's that range is a lot smaller, and like there's things I think are strange, like what you just mentioned. There's other things, and that if anyone were to decide to be Catholic, you have to take those as well.
Yeah. I think that was something I noticed pretty early on after being received into the church, was that a lot of Catholics don't believe all of it. I've met like pro-choice Catholics, I've met gay Catholics. That was interesting to me. But what I quickly realized was that for the converts, we had to scrutinize everything in the tradition and ultimately accept all of it. When you get confirmed, you say that you profess in front of the entire church that I believe that what the Catholic Church teaches is received from God. That's what a confirmation is. That's what it consists of. I mean, it's more than that, but whatever. I mean, that's like your part in the confirmation. And there's more to it, but you say that, and you affirm that, and that's a pretty radical step. Credo Catholics, though, a lot of them don't even get confirmed, and then some of them do, but they just did it because their parents made them go to the catechesis and that sort of thing. It's kind of like how baptism works in the Evangelical Church. Sometimes it's just like, well, we believe in a believer's baptism, but it's time to get baptized, Johnny, or whatever. So yeah, that is kind of the difference. Like, you'll meet Catholics who believe everything that things that there's some ridiculous percentage of Catholics who don't believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. You're not. It's like you've strayed from the path if you believe that, unfortunately, because that's kind of the whole thing. The Eucharist, the Mass, it's the source and summit of the Catholic faith. Yeah. So it's kind of a jarring thing to sort of just like submit to this entirely different belief system in all of its teachings. But I think there's a lot of peace in that, because it comes down to how you define freedom, right? I mean, that was something I would talk to my students in campus ministry about often. It's like, how do you define freedom? And they're intellectual, Duke students. They're saying stuff like, "Oh, it's my ability to move unhindered in the world and whatever, rights language, whatever." And it's like, freedom is the ability to choose the good. In a sense, it's to be bound by the good, right? So folks who think they're free by, believing whatever they want and choosing to do whatever they want, they aren't really free, because they're not choosing the good. They're not bound to the good. They don't even have that ability to choose the good. They're bound to something else.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of like thinking on it, like followed, like, you didn't like live with like that dichotomy. Like, you followed like your convictions to where you are now, which is like, I feel like a lot of us like are afraid of that in a way, to like confront that reality. But I think you were one of the few to like follow your convictions, that were well thought out to the most coherent conclusion, which for you was Catholicism, which I guess has built like a good framework. Because I mean, there were things like I didn't know that you were talking about that I didn't get updated on, which is like so good hearing. And now that we're kind of like caught up to speed, I think Kiala had a few questions like on the post side of things.
Yeah.
To kind of
Okay, real quick, because we
sure.
can do this. I need to pee. I can just edit this part out later.
Oh,
It's fine. We'll just leave it running. Okay, wait.
I'm gonna get water.
I can just cut this out.
Oh, do you?
Oh, great.
Oh, do you have your questions ready? Because I kind of gassed you up with Cal's got some sick questions.
Oh yeah, no, I got some good ones.
Will you eat?
Okay. What did you have for breakfast?
I didn't eat.
Do you?
Anything?
Okay. Well, here's the first question. This is so me and my wife Alana are fervent listeners. We listen to every podcast, and something big fans. So I was asking her, "Oh, do you have any questions?" And she had a bunch of questions. We kind of narrowed it down, but and something we talked about. But I was just kind of wondering if you given any more thought. Like, I guess what do you think you're trying to get out of this podcast with like all of our
Yeah,
friends
I don't know. I think it's sort of like a personal thing that I've always wanted to do some sort of like project that I can throw creativity into and be able to talk to folks. It's something I've just always wanted to do, and the concept kind of came up just on a whim with my texting conversation with Kama, but yeah, no, I don't know if there's necessarily anything I want to accomplish. I was actually talking to my boss about it today because he's probably listening, so shouts out to him. Like I'm like, man, I'm just so surprised whenever someone from outside of our community like listens to it and enjoys it, because it's sort of, I mean, really I only expect like 30 to 50 people to actually resonate with the guests I have on and the conversations that we have. Like it's really meant for those folks, I guess, in some way, to kind of chronicle that story. But I think at the same time, there's this kind of golden rule that I have, that we don't use any like proper nouns around anything. And I think one of the reasons for that, other than just like I don't want it to be the like, bagging on XYZ church, whatever, is that these stories are universal to some extent. We like anyone who grew up in that sort of evangelical cultural milieu of the late 2000s, early 2010s, they all had that friend who was the Theo bro, I guess me. They all had that friend who was sort of the outcast, someone like Nalu. There was always that person in the closet, someone like Kama. There was, this person who became somewhat of a token testimony that we always kind of commodified and exploited. And I think that's someone like Shawnee. I think if you go to any church in America or even abroad, I mean, that's what Ayaka and I were talking about, how that sort of template of evangelicalism got just copy pasted everywhere. I think people will find that those stories are universal sort of archetypes in evangelicalism. And I am just kind of curious about like what happened, where are you at? There's been some really intimidating ones for me. I think meeting with Britt and Ayaka and Nalu. Those ones were really hard because it's like I haven't spoken to you guys in like 10 years. I don't know where you are. I don't know what you believe. Those were challenging ones to do. Not because they're like confrontational or whatever. They're so nice. Like Ayaka was so gracious. Nalu was so gracious. Britt was awesome and super vulnerable, and it was great. But yeah, it was just like that sort of distance was complex to navigate.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's kind of like archetypes you were talking about and like characters in a cast in a way in a story that's being written. Do you think like those are just natural byproducts of every evangelical I want to say system, but do you think those are just like natural byproducts or are those like unique?
I don't know. I mean, I think
us?
Obviously I think the three of us know that there are certain stories that could have only existed in the church that we grew up in. The context, the cultural context, the belief systems, the values that were firmly located in that church. However, I do think there are just going to be those cases of whatever, that token testimony, that gay kid in the closet, that is just sort of a reality of evangelical churches in general, and those stories are sort of universal. So yeah, both, I guess.
Yeah, I think that kind of segues into my next question, which is like, this is the one I'm maybe like most curious about, and it's so I'm one of the people that has like pointed out to you like, oh, it seems like you have this kind of opinion of the evangelical church that leaks out here and there. Like Quinn's podcast, was really obvious that you didn't like.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
you didn't like it. And it leaks out, and so it's good that we have this opportunity for you to like, I guess, put it out there. I guess that was my question is like, so it seems like you don't like the evangelical church, and we've talked about it like privately a lot, but do you think that evangelicalism can be separated from the kinds of toxicity? I think you've used that word to describe it. And with Ayaka, you're talking about like it has this like franchise like quality to it, like it's reproducible on all these different places, and all of those things that like maybe we associate with it. Do you think that like is that fundamental to like?
Yeah, and real quick,
having a hard time talking,
with
you know what
Quinn's
I'm asking.
one, I do feel I apologized actually on Instagram after that one, just because I felt like I went in pretty hard. My family, we were down there for Quinn's wedding, and my family, we kind of just debriefed it the day after. Everyone got to listen to it, and they were like, because we were like drinking wine before or whatever, we were hanging out, having dinner. So it was like we're we're transitioning from that into recording a podcast, and it was honestly pretty emotional for all of us to kind of relive all those moments because my brother got wronged big time, and I've always held a gripe against that particular church and those leaders, and I've always been very frustrated, and I think I kind of just like bled on the crowd a little bit too much, but yeah, I think I don't know. I don't really know. I don't really know if you can separate this sort of yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of scholars who have sort of explored that idea of like, what is this thing? What are the sort of values, practices, belief of evangelicalism, and what are they informed by? What are they, and how are those, how do those come out? And I don't know. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that are just part and parcel with it, particularly. Yeah, I mean, there's some fundamental things that are problematic, right? I think, particularly around sola scriptura, right? You know, you
Yeah.
have this idea that scripture is authoritative and even like the sole authority of the Christian faith, but that doesn't really work, um, because then it becomes like whose interpretation of that scripture is authoritative, you know, which is what we all
Right.
saw, and I think that's sort of how Protestantism is defined. Is that, you know, it's like all these different people's interpretation of scripture, whether it be Martin Luther or John Wesley or John Calvin or maybe Simple McPherson, you know, William J. Seymour, whoever, you know.
Sure.
Um, that's so then, I mean, churches become these sorts of cults of personality, you know. It's the pastor's interpretation. It's such and such pastor's interpretation of, you know, John 6 or Romans 15 or these really like theologically and ethically and politically dense chapters, and it's sort of just subject to our own kind of political, ethical, moral beliefs, and you see that in conservative evangelicalism. It's like it's so comfortable sitting in a American Republican um, view, you know, which is for me, it's like problematic. And it's not to say that I'm like extremely liberal. I'm just like, I don't want my religion to sort of fit so comfortably in a political identity, you know? So it's like, that's where I saw evangelicalism going when I was in divinity school. It's like, in 50 years, you are going to be like super ardent, like right wing conservative, or you're going to be like extremely woke, progressive, um, identity politics, whatever. And it's going to be like extreme, like pushing to the extreme. And I think we're already seeing that, you know, like 5 years later. Um, so yeah, I think there's some things fundamentally that are problematic. And then, of course, in charismatic Christianity, I think it sort of plays into that cult of personality again. It's whoever's most gifted that gets platformed, rather than, you know, who is most devoted to the person of Jesus Christ. And I mean, who am I to judge that? But, you know, it was like when we were in Bible college and they'd let a freshman first week speak at chapel. And I was like, what are we doing here? We're going to let this like person who just got here, probably like just became Christian, is having this existential crisis that they need to become a pastor. Like they're going to preach the first week. Like, what are we doing? This is ridiculous. But I think that is, you know, that's just, I shouldn't say that's like indicative of Pentecostalism, but I think it has those tendencies to platform people, um, because of gifts, you know. And you saw these like really weird characters, especially in Bible college, who it was just like the gift kind of like defined their entire personality, and they sort of saw themselves to be something more than they really were. And
Okay, well, this is my last question, and I think it's kind of been alluded to, but I mean, I was curious, like, so I know that you're like, in general, like, I don't know if you'd say that you're hurt by like what happened to Quinn, but like, are you angry or hurt like at large by like your experiences with the evangelical church, or bitter
yeah,
maybe? I was just kind of curious if you would say that.
um, it's not the first thing that I would think of. I mean, if someone listens to this in that sort of circle, you know, who's still there, they're probably gonna think that, and that's fair. And there are like certainly some wounds. I definitely did feel like an outcast. I definitely felt like no one really had my back. I felt like I was being overlooked, but at the same time, I was kind of a problematic person. I just didn't like going to church, and I didn't like And I like challenging people a lot. And so I don't think I was really a good fit. I think my brother thing, it's kind of particular to that uh, sort of church. I
Yeah.
was extremely frustrated with them.
Sure.
And I think, honestly, the fruit of that church sort of speaks for itself. Like the scandals that have plagued them ever since sort of speak for themselves. However, I don't think it's necessarily a woundedness from me. I, and it's like, I don't know. I do sound extremely condescending whenever I talk about evangelicalism and evangelical churches. Um, and I always have had that tendency to sort of be condescending because I always just think I know more, and it's not fair. But no, I look on that time as like, I don't know, like I feel like just stunted, I don't know if that makes sense. Like I'm like, oh, like you haven't left home yet. You haven't begun that hero's journey to some extent. Because if you were to begin to see the sort of like cognitive dissonance in your own mind and the mental gymnastics that you have to sort of participate in to stay in the system, I don't think you would be there still. And I was extremely comfortable in it. And I think that's just an extremely comfortable place to be. It's it's seeker sensitive. It's like it's meant to be very comfortable. Who wouldn't feel at home in a coffee shop? But I think um, it's just something that I look back on as like sort of like in the same way that I look back on like adolescence. And again, that sounds extremely condescending, and I don't know, but that's like it's honest. That's how I feel whenever I can't even imagine going back into evangelical church or like a youth group. Like when I go and visit my sisters at like their very evangelical college and see the sort of spirituality and the things that are said, and the you know the kids playing acoustic guitar in a circle and singing elevation songs. It's like I'm just like, oh, like God is so much bigger than this thing, and will encounter you in a much more like real and tangible way if you just step out. I don't know.
Hmm.
And it's not to say that I have it figured out and I'm this like whatever spiritual master. It's just that like for me, I needed to grow up, and this is what it looked like for me. And I've said this before. I said it on the Shawnee's podcast that like, like there's a lot of evangelicals who are better Christians than me. They pray more. They read the Bible more. They try to seek out God's will in their life more than I do. I get so caught up in my own sins. And I think I just needed more grace than they did. I don't know. And I guess implicitly that means that I've encountered grace in a more real and concrete way, which I would argue I have through the sacramental life of the Catholic Church. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm going to lose a lot of listeners over that one.
Think so? I hope so. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
you mean like
that's who you lose.
You think that you've stirred controversy just now? Is that what you mean? Or
no, I don't think so. I think people who have spoken to me know that's kind of like how I feel about things. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I probably sound like a real big jerk right now, and I'm probably not communicating my faith in a way that's very charitable, in a way that would make people want to pursue it. I probably sound, but like that's just like, I don't know. I think my frustration with evangelicalism coming out probably, because I mean, it's like I was an evangelical for 25 years.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thanks for being honest. Was there anything that you wanted to say more of, or that you expected to talk about that you didn't? Just to like take a page out of your book.
I don't know. Not particularly. Now that I think about it, that's such a like bad question, because it's like, what would they say? I used to do that. I used to ask the question though when I did broadcast journalism in high school. Sometimes you'd get something out of it. Sometimes you wouldn't.
Yeah, that's not a bad question.
I don't like it, because then it's just like, oh, what are people missing? I don't know. Man, I just want to, I feel bad now. I feel like people are probably like super closed off to the Catholic faith now. Hopefully not. Because
No, I don't think so.
But I would say, there's a lot of people, as this podcast continues, there's going to be a lot of people who have left the faith, who don't want anything to do with the faith, don't want anything to do with church, whatever. For me, and I think for them too, it's not just like a subjective thing. I think this is just reality. The answers they were looking for and the truth that they were seeking can be found in Christ. That's the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
I think all those people who we know, it's just crazy. Like, I mean, when I started this podcast, I was just like, man, it'd be crazy if we spoke to everyone from Bible college, because half of them left. Half of them left. They have nothing to do with churches anymore. Their relationships are fractured. All that stuff. Like, Christ is trying to give you everything you need. Christ has laid out everything on the line for you. He's given you everything. You just need to receive it. You need to be willing to receive it. And I get it. That's like really hard for people, especially if they've been wounded by churches. There's a lot of bad stuff that happened in our church, especially in the Catholic Church. Gosh, how many movies do we have about that? How many like articles are there about that? But even still, the fullness of grace and mercy and light and life and peace are being given to you through Christ and through the sacraments of his church. That's what I believe. And I believe that to be true. So give it a try, give it a try. Be open to it, and be open to God, be open to something bigger than yourself. Because Christ, even if you left and you feel like you're running away from this, Christ has not stopped pursuing you. That's the bottom line. Yeah. So I think that's the thing for me.
Yeah, I think there's no better way to end it. So.
Snaps for Jesus.
Snaps for Jesus. Poetry.
I'm gonna stop this bad boy. Later, everyone.